Marvellous, isn't it? Ainsdale Nature Reserve on the west coast of Lancashire between Southport and Liverpool. Southport that way, Liverpool that way. It's a nature reserve mainly because it contains one of the finest examples of a west coast dune land in Britain. And not only are the dunes and associated landforms well preserved, but they also provide a distinctive habitat for many kinds of plants and wildlife, and these are protected here. The size of the reserve comes out clearly from the air. From the beach over the dunes, the reserve stretches inland for 1.5 kilometres, and it's about 3 kilometres from north to south. The reserve is on the coast of northwest England. It lies by Formby between the sprawling conurbation of Liverpool and Merseyside and the thriving holiday resort of Southport. The Ainsdale Nature Reserve covers some 480 hectares. A transect along a line from west to east, from the sea inland, brings out the detailed features of the terrain. We're going to follow a line along the transect from the sea, across the foreshore dunes, past the wet slack, the inland dunes, the dry slack, and up to the pine plantation. Let's begin at the sea. When the tide's out, the low water mark is just over 0.5 kilometre from the line of foreshore dunes. The vast expanse of exposed sand has time to dry out at the surface between tides, and as onshore winds and breezes blow, grains of sand are picked up and blown in the air or bounced and rolled along the surface towards the land. The prevailing westerly winds are an important factor in this. Studies of the direction of the strongest winds show that these mainly come from the west and west-northwest. At the coastal margin, the sand begins to pile up to form foreshore dunes. These have a distinctive shape. The sides rise to a crest marked by marram grass. The sand granules are blown up the windward slope, they reach the crest and simply tumble over. The windward side is usually gentler in slope than the leeward side if the wind alone is active in the formation of a dune. But along this stretch of the coast, gales and storms erode the windward side, often causing steep-face sand cliffs. The sand offers little resistance to very strong winds and crashing waves. The process of deposition with some erosion never ceases. The end product is the shifting of the sand from one side of the dune to the other. The overall effect is the movement of the dunes. They appear to migrate. As the dunes move inland, new ones build up on the foreshore. Records show that along this coast, over a period of 14.5 years, new dunes were being built up so that the dune area has been extended in that time by just over 10.5 metres. At the same time, some dunes had doubled in height and obviously had become much broader at the base. The highest dunes run in an almost continuous line on the foreshore fronting the open beach. The movement of the dunes is continually altering the coastline. There are various ways of stopping the movement of sand dunes inland as the wind blows over them. Planting grass is one of the best ways, and the most common type of grass is marram grass. The roots dig down into the sand and they bind the sand together, and the sand piles up against them and the dunes stop moving inland. But the roots are very fragile. They can easily be dislodged, just as I'm doing now. And if you walk over the grass, kicking away at the roots of the grass and destroying it, you'll find that ultimately you've destroyed the dune as well. So stick to the paths when you're walking over sand dunes. Indeed, careful checks have to be kept on the wind erosion along the footpaths through the dunes. As more and more people walk through the sand, a natural corridor forms through which low-level winds are funneled. This causes a blowout. That's a corridor hollowed by the wind, which gets wider and wider. But not only marram grass has been planted along this stretch of the coast. pine trees are tall and strong, Madam Grass is short and weak. But when it comes to withstanding the movement of sand dunes, Madam Grass wins every time. These pine trees were planted years ago to try and stop the sand moving in. But the sand covered them up, entirely covered them up, killed them off, and then moved on, leaving this dead forest behind, a dead forest of stumps, every one as dead as a doornail. For Madam Grass to survive, it needs constant supplies of fresh sand. On the landward side of the foreshore dunes, fresh sand isn't always available, so different plants appear adapted to the new conditions, like Portland spurge and the morel toadstool. These hollows backing the dunes are called slacks. Nearer to the sea are the wet slacks. Here in the wet slacks, where the water table, known locally as the ream, is near the surface, we find other kinds of plants. These include the greater bird's foot trefoil, the early marsh orchid, and the yellow iris. The natterjack toad, also found in the wet slacks, is a feature of the Ainsdale Reserve. Once it was common, but now this species is relatively rare. You can identify the natterjack toad by the narrow yellow stripe down the middle of its backbone. It needs clean, sandy soil to burrow into for its home, while for successful breeding, it needs shallow water. These conditions are found in the wetter slacks, but even small changes in the water table can seriously affect its survival. The dampness of the slack is also important for the movement of sand, since by wetting the sand grains, it slows down their movement. Inland, the slacks become drier, the dunes get smaller, and the distinctive shapes are not so noticeable. Vegetation gets thicker with a mixture of grasses, shrubs, and flowering plants, eventually giving way to pine plantations. Here, red squirrels still survive. The vegetation, while adapted to the physical conditions, is also the product of a long history of attempts by local landowners to control the movement of the sand. For more than 200 years, until far into the 19th century, it was a compulsory part of the lease that tenants should cultivate Madam Grass. But as Madam Grass can't survive far from sources of fresh sand, a policy of planting coniferous trees was adopted. So, in a short distance, some 1.5 kilometres, the transect has shown a variety of landforms and its effect on plants and wildlife. Similar terrain is found extending northwards from the reserve. The lines of foreshore dunes continue northwards along the beach. As we approach Southport, 8 kilometres to the north, we can see that the compacted sand of the beach serves as a huge car park for holidaymakers and even as a landing strip for a light plane. But what about if you want to swim? Where's the sea? Some would say that Southport is a seaside town without any sea. Well, that's not true. I've seen the sea over the promenade many times. But it is true that the beach at Southport is very flat. And that means that at low tide, the tide goes out a very long way, as you can deduce from the length of the pier behind me. Here, at low tide, the sea is 6 kilometres away. Southport has a population of over 86,000, and at the peak of the summer holiday season, this is boosted by an additional 9,000 staying visitors. Southport also has very many day trippers, as it's easily reached from Liverpool, Manchester and the many industrial towns of Lancashire because of the improved motorway and main road links to the resort. The marina, popular with sailors and water skiers, has a distinctly artificial look about it, and yet although the banks are reinforced and walled, the floor is of the sand which forms the coast. Indeed, a straight comparison can be made between this marina and the wet slack we saw behind the foreshore dunes of Ainsdale. When the tide retreats so far down the beach, a marina of this kind is essential for a holiday resort seeking to cater for today's popular holiday activities. Water skiing, sailing and fishing are currently booming in Britain. Off some beaches, water skiing and even sailing can spoil stretches of open sandy coastline. Not only is the noise of motorboats annoying, but also the boats and skiers are dangerous for people swimming. In a marina of this kind, the water sports enthusiasts are guaranteed suitable water conditions, close to car parks and other facilities, and other holiday makers can escape from them or, if interested, watch them. At Southport, then, we can see how terrain similar to that at Ainsdale has been put to use as a site for a holiday resort. To the south, 33 kilometres from Southport and 25 kilometres from the Ainsdale Nature Reserve, is the important commercial port and industrial conurbation of Liverpool and Merseyside. Looking north from the famous Royal Liver building at the pier head, one of Liverpool's most distinctive landmarks, we can see the Prince's Dock, from where passenger ships sail on the Liverpool to Belfast route. The sheer size of the port complex can here be judged from the air. From here, the docks stretch northwards for 7.5 kilometres.
When me and me mates we left our school, there wasn't much work in Liverpool. We went to the docks again and again, but they don't stop, lads, they only want men.
Come back when you're 21, lads.
So I joined me dad and my granddad too, working at Gladstone gate number 2. The overtime's gear and I've got a good pen, and I get along fine with the rest of the men.
There's a gay lot of fellas down there.
From Garston to Gladstone, a 10-mile of docks with keys and cranes and gates and locks. 13,000 side by side, Jones and Riley, Hughes and McBride.
Catholics, Protestants, they're all working together.
There's a meeting when a boss gets tough, when a car goes dirty, when a bloke gets rough. When Bessie's there, we'll come in force, cause we all like to argue.
Brandy, of course.
The most modern dock is the Royal Seaforth Dock at the northern end of the Liverpool dock system. Just over 3 kilometres of quays surround a deep water basin nearly 17.5 metres deep. Here there are special facilities for meat, grain and timber products and a fully computerised container terminal. The Port of Liverpool is the most central deep-sea port in the United Kingdom. As well as being a major port for imports, it is Britain's major export port, and within a radius of 160 kilometres, there are more than half of all Britain's manufacturing industries, which produce over 60% of all the country's export products.
And a 10-mile of docks with keys and cranes and gates and locks. 13,000 side by side, Jones and Riley, Hughes and McBride.
Catholics, Protestants, they're all working together.
There's a meeting when a boss gets tough, when a car goes dirty, when a bloke gets rough. When Bessie's there, we'll come in force, cause we all like to argue.
Brandy, of course.
We talk of politics and the bomb, the unions and the things they've done, religion and new scales of pay conditions as they are today.
Not like the bad old days.
Me granddad had to work and sweat all the hours that he could get, but now machines have come to stay, there's more time off and there to pay. So they say.
All this is in stark contrast with the reminders of Liverpool's Old Port. The first dock was completed in 1720. The biggest expansion occurred in the 19th century. In this construction, the engineers had to contend with a tidal variation of 9 meters and variations in the amount of river water flowing into the Mersey estuary. Dredging a navigable channel and constructing the wharves, warehouses, and other harbour building presented engineering difficulties. The buildings are set in foundations in an environment similar to that at Ainsdale. At Seaforth, trenches have been sunk some 20 metres through surface sand, through the underlying boulder clay, to the Bunter sandstone, which has given this modern dock solid rock foundations. The port is always busy with a variety of shipping. Here's a rare sight, an old Thames sailing barge. There are only about 4 left. Compare that with this vast oil tanker. And here's a tanker being launched on the opposite bank of the Mersey at the shipyards at Birkenhead. So, within a length of 33 kilometres along the South Lancashire coast, we've seen how man has adapted the coastline to meet the needs of work and recreation. This is how the entire length of the coastline probably would have remained if it had been unaffected by man.